Hi everyone, here's the Book Chemist once again. Happy 2025 everybody. As always, at the end of the year, I like to look back upon my year of readings and reflect on the books that impressed me the most, entertained me the most, that I found most moving and that resonated with me the most. So this is my list of the 20 books that I read in 2024 that I liked the most. All of them come highly recommended from me. Just a couple of caveats as always. The list only includes books that I've read for the first time in 2024. It doesn't include rereads, and it only includes fiction books. There's no graphic novels, no non-fiction in here. Also, as always, please don't get too invested or worked up about the ranking of the books. I put them in order just because I think that's more fun, but I'm not trying to claim that any of these books are better than the ones lower in the ranking. All 20 of them are great books if you ask me. Before I dive into the list, a few highlights from my year in reading, more broadly speaking. One of the most exciting things that happened in my year as a reader was that I finally finished the complete Peanuts series put out by Canongate, which collects all Charles Schulz daily Peanuts strips from 1950 to 2000. It took me roughly 4 years, just over 4 years actually, to read this series, reading a few strips every day before going to bed. I've been a fan of Peanuts since I was 8. They've been so important in my life. They resonate with me really deeply, and this was really a great way of rediscovering that childhood feeling of wonder, amusement, sadness at the adventures of Charlie Brown, Snoopy and co. And a great way to celebrate Schulz's work. I recommend the series very highly. Those who watched last year's Top 20 will remember that a type of book that I like to read quite a lot are history books about revolutionary Europe. And in that specific category, my honorable mention from this year was definitely Henri Hazan's Popular History of the French Revolution, which is a very stimulating overlook to the revolution, which questions some basic assumptions about it that are often repeated in official historiography. It asks some important questions about it. Was it actually a bourgeois revolution? Does it even make sense to think about it that way? Was the reign of terror a thing, or is it just a historiographical construct? It approaches these and other questions in a way that's very intelligent, balanced, well argued, well researched. It was an amazing book and I highly recommend it. Just like a lot of French historiography on the revolution, the book takes for granted that the reader will know the broad strokes of what happened between 1789 and 1794 in France. So if you're new to the subject, this probably isn't your best introduction to that period in history. But that said, if you know the highlights of how that period developed and unraveled, you really don't need to be a scholar to enjoy this, because I'm not. On that subject, my favorite graphic novel that I read in 2024 was, by some margin, Révolution by Florent Grouazel and Locard, an amazing fictional treatment of the year 1789 and the outbreak of the revolution, especially in Paris and Versailles. It's a sweeping, epic book that moves between various characters facing these earth-shattering events. It offers some very original and very insightful perspectives on these events, very much like Hazan's book itself. And this graphic novel moves brilliantly between an epic tone and a tone of squalor, between ecstasy and violence, in a way that I think does justice to this incredible historical moment. I'm also a big fan of pop music, and a great book about music that I read in 2024 was Rip It Up and Start Again by Simon Reynolds, an encyclopedic overview of the post-punk, dark wave, synth pop movement between the end of the 70s and the early 80s. I thought I was knowledgeable about that genre, but I discovered a new band in every page of that book, which is very well written, very well researched. And if, like me, you somehow still hadn't read Please Kill Me, please do. It's amazing. If you're a fan of punk, or really if you're a fan of rock and roll music, it's a must read. Very much like the graphic novel about the French Revolution, it wavers between the epic and the squalid, and it's just illuminating book about the lives of these musicians and about their times. The list at last. Number 20 is A Brief History of 7 Killings by Marlon James, as an epic saga that moves between the decades and moves between different countries. It's anchored in a specific historical moment, which is the attempted assassination of Bob Marley on the eve of his Smile Jamaica concert in Kingston in 1976. But it departs, it explodes from this historical moment to traverse the lives of countless characters and explore very complicated, very deep questions about the nature and the identity of Jamaica as a country, about the nature of evil and the possibility of redemption. It's by far the most ambitious book on this list. It has the historical scope of Hilary Mantel's Wolf Hall novels and some of the linguistic playfulness and daring of Thomas Pynchon's Mason and Dixon. It's regarded as a modern classic for a reason. Mason and Dixon, by the way, I actually reread this summer, and it's just as great as always. Number 19 is Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead by Olga Tokarczuk, a mesmerizing enigma of a novel, a book centered on a compelling, unique narrator. This is a philosophical inquiry with murder. It's a gothic mystery full of scheming animals. Different readers are going to take something different away from this novel. It's beautifully written and it's full of humor, sadness, pain, mourning, and I'm not surprised that many of you seem to really love this one based on your comments. And by the way, if I filmed a review for any of the books that I'm mentioning in this video, I'll include a link in the description box to my full review of that book. Number 18 is The Golden House by Salman Rushdie. Very much a guilty pleasure for me, and I say this as somebody who doesn't really believe in guilty pleasures. This book deals with several contemporary cultural and political issues in a way that is at times rather ham-fisted. Its attitude toward the first Trump election wavers between the whiny and the simplistic, and it feels very much like a liberal rant. That said, it still stands as a valuable testament to a certain type of liberal shock that rippled through the world in 2016. And even though it might not be the most astute political book you're ever going to read, as a novel, which ultimately this is what it is actually a brilliant family saga. It's complex, multifaceted, engrossing, and really entertaining. Number 17 is the Blackwater Saga by Michael McDowell, which I'm counting here as a whole set because I read 5 out of the 6 books in the course of 2024. Another sweeping family saga focusing on a southern dynasty in the US, full of surprises and twists of fates and unexpected changes, as some characters in this doomed family evolve from spoiled children to determined and wise adults, whereas others of them become carnivorous amphibian monsters. If you can handle both gory supernatural horror and dainty social commentary within the span of a few pages, you're going to have great fun with this series. Number 16 is The Belly of Paris, another one of Émile Zola's classic naturalist novels. This one exploring the lives of the people living and working around Les Halles, the main food market at the heart of 19th century Paris. Expect dire poverty, expect scheming bourgeois, expect a beautiful sharp insight into the mechanisms of society. There is one scene late into this book set in the cellars underneath Les Halles, which is as hellish as anything you're going to find in Germinal, and it's been haunting me all year really. To me, this is a book about the extreme, the hellish cost of the food industry on people, on animals, and on our cities. And this to me is a topic that is so much more relevant today than it was in the 19th century. Number 15 is American Ities by Miles Beard, a surprising and enigmatic novel about a young scholar's eventful trip to the US. A novel that's both rich in plot and mysteries as we get to slowly reconstruct the murky history of the protagonist's recent traumas, and is also able to dissect and analyze its narrator's emotions its desires and its affections with a very high degree of skillfulness. Especially if you are a literature scholar, maybe you are doing a PhD, maybe you just finished it, you'll find plenty that is relatable in Miles, the protagonist's adventures, and you really shouldn't miss this one. Number 14 is Qualcosa ci inventeremo by Giorgio Scianna. The title roughly translates as We'll Think of Something. A consequence of the fact that I've been reading many more Italian books and to a lesser extent French books in recent years is that occasionally I come across a really great book and I can't talk about it on this channel because there's no English translation out there yet. This is unfortunately going to happen a couple of times in the course of this video. Please be patient. For those of you who read Italian, Qualcosa ci inventeremo is a very simple but extremely compelling novel about two siblings, a teenager and his kid brother, living alone in Milan after the death of their parents. The prospect of having to move to Pavia and be with an uncle of theirs is on the horizon throughout the novel, unless they can demonstrate that they can look after themselves, considering that one of these kids is will very soon turn 18 and will not be a minor anymore. The plot sounds almost as if this were a daytime TV drama, but really this is a beautiful and insightful book about what it means to be a teenager, the specific sadness and longing of that time of your life, where you have to cope with the countless impossible, stupid rules of adults. You can see through them, you can see how silly they are, but at the same time you're also not really able to fend for yourself and look after yourself, at least not effectively, not well. Plus, as far as plots go, kids fighting to stay in Milan instead of having to move to the provinces is something that resonates very specifically with me, so I found this incredibly engrossing for personal reasons. Number 13 is The Unfolding by A.M. Holmes, a novel of political intrigue that is almost the foil of Salman Rushdie's Golden House. This one is about a certain type of crisis in conservative circles in the United States that followed the election of Barack Obama to the presidency in 2008. Unlike The Golden House, The Unfolding is actually a very astute and sharp political novel, as insightful as The Golden House is cartoonish. There's a murky fascist plot going on in the course of this book, but there's also a very warm, desperate family drama unfolding at its heart. And overall, this is an important reminder that the oppressors of mankind are ultimately men themselves, and often fairly childish ones at that. Number 12 is Le Otto Montagne, The Eight Mountains by Paolo Cognetti, the story of a lifelong friendship against the stark backdrop of an alpine village in northern Italy. Even more than the friendship between the two protagonists, what stayed with me from this book is the narrator's relationship with his father, one of the most interesting and elusive characters I've encountered this year. Speaking of fathers and mountains, have you read the latest Zerocalcare? I thought it was amazing. It's hilarious, it packs a punch. It's probably my favorite of his book that I've read so far. I hope it gets translated into English very soon, because more than some others of his books, I think this one would probably travel quite well outside Italy. Number 11 is Sag Harbor by Colson Whitehead, another book about the quintessential joys and miseries of teenage life. But this one approaches the topic from a place of great humor. It's a book about the summers of your teenage years, times of great boundless freedoms that often lead to little more than just a TV dinner and a monster movie, but occasionally take you to beautiful and unexpected places. It's a book with a hard core of sadness buried under all the jokes and the wistfulness, and if you are a nostalgic person like me, you'll probably find it just as irresistible as I did. Number 10 is Martin Dressler by Stephen Millhauser, a Pulitzer-winning novel from the 90s I'd been meaning to read for a very long time, and a book that scratched another specific itch for me. This is a story of a self-made man rising from humble beginnings to a place of immense wealth in the New York of the turn of the 20th century. And he does this by following his dream, which is building buildings of ever more grandiose scale, castles towering above the street and snaking underground through countless buried layers. I'm somebody who's endlessly fascinated with cities. I'm fascinated with the way they are built around layers upon layers, and I'm fascinated by places such as universities, department stores, public buildings, all of these places that replicate the city on a smaller scale. And Martin Dressler very much moves into these worlds and speaks about the specific poetry and madness of these places. It's a book that talks about urban enigmas in a way that is at once feverish and dreamy, as it slips very gradually from a place of great realism to something that feels very much like fantasy. Is this a utopia? Is this a fantasy, a dream, or a cautionary tale? Is this a naturalist novel or a fantastical one? You will have to read it and decide for yourself. Number 9 is La società degli uomini-barbagianni, The Owl Man Civilization by Emanuele Kraushaar. Another book that's, another Italian book that's sadly still untranslated, although it should be. By far the scariest book I've read in 2024. The premise is very simple. We have a narrator who's living alone and is going through some kind of midlife crisis, and who starts reading a book about this fictitious race of owlmen, this creature who supposedly live in the woods and who prey on humans and eat human flesh. As the book progresses, the narrator's grip on reality starts slipping, the boundary between real and fictional starts blurring, and he finds himself more and more compelled toward the woods at the back of his house. If you think you know where the story is going, you're probably at once very right and very wrong. Number 8 is La Straniera, Strangers I Have Known by Claudia Durastanti, which I'm totally gonna review for the channel very soon. This is a beautiful book that is at once a memoir and something else entirely, not just because of its ambiguous fictional status. This is very much the age of autofiction that we're living through, but because this doesn't really resemble your typical autobiography or really your typical narrative. In some ways, this is the story of the protagonist's relationship with their parents, who, unlike her, were both deaf and who were both artistic, temperamental, difficult characters. It's the story of her upbringing, how it was growing up with such parents. It's also the story of how it felt growing up between Brooklyn and between rural southern Italy, split between these very different worlds where the protagonist would spend different portions of her year as a child. Yet both these definitions will probably give you an idea of the book that is very different from what this actually is. The best I can say is that it's a unique reflection about life and about the ways in which we give it meaning. It's a book about a person's life that will tell you very little about what actually happened in her life, but will still leave you feeling as if you knew her intimately. It's a very unconventional book, but that doesn't mean that it's difficult or complicated or hard to get into. Far from it, it's really absorbing. Number 7 is The Night Watchman by Erdrich, a beautiful story of community set in the 1950s in an Indian reservation in the Midwest at a crucial time for Native Americans, a time where the American government was considering terminating certain Native American tribes, meaning basically taking their ancestral rights away from them. The individual concerns of all these characters are balanced beautifully with the immense relevance and import of this historical moment in a way that is perfect, that perfectly walks the line between the private and public sphere. This is a book about unspeakable horrors that can also be very tender at times, very humorous, and even silly. It's a bit of a magic trick, the way Erdrich can balance these two worlds so naturally and so uniformly across the entire novel. Number 6 is Happy Are the Happy by Yasmina Reza, a collection of related, interconnected short stories about the neuroses, disappointments and midlife crisis of a broad cast of middle-class characters living in Paris. Its humor is as acid as it is unforgettable. It talks with great insights about the countless miseries of everyday life, and there are scenes of petty fights in the cheese aisle of a supermarket in here that are as hilarious as they are cringy. But at the same time, it can also be a very tender book and a very warm one. I found it amazing. Chilean Poet by Alejandro Zambra, number 5, is another book that is at once clear-eyed, ruthless and even cruel, but also rather sentimental. It's the story of an unconventional family moving along very unconventional lines that is going to subvert your expectations of what a family drama can or should be. It's a hilarious and heartbreaking novel that speaks in very clear terms about desire, about the beginning and the end of love, about fatherhood and the nature of family. It also includes an unforgettable cat. Number 4 is The Art of Losing by Alice Zeniter. What else? Yet another sweeping family saga following a family moving from Algeria to France at the end of the Algerian War of Independence that terminated French rule, colonial rule over Algeria. It's an engrossing and unsentimental book about a handful of really unforgettable characters, but it's also a novel that asks some truly important and huge questions. Are we really masters of our own destiny? Do we ever really take a side in life, or are our decisions shaped by our world, our background, our family's histories? Just like The Night Watchman, it's a book that moves beautifully between the personal and historical sphere, showing how history comes to shape our lives, our mentalities, our psychology in the deepest, sometimes most pernicious ways. To me, it's just as awesome as, say, Middlesex by Jeffrey Eugenides or Cavalier and Clay by Michael Chabon, other novels that combine humor, unforgettable characters, and a concern for exploring what it means to live through some truly traumatic historical moments. Number 3 is Help Wanted by Adele Wallman, an amazing novel set in a big box store in the US. A novel about working class American life that explores this world in ways that are eye-opening, insightful, and never condescending, something that is actually quite rare in literature. Very often, even with the great naturalist writers from the 19th century, when they talk about humble life, about the life of people in difficult economic situations, they do so from positions where they turn these characters either into saints or into samples of certain historical movements or situations, and take some of their humanity away. This doesn't happen at all in Wallman's book. These characters are showed in all their flawed but luminous humanity. They are showed in a way that is very respectful, even when the novel is making fun of them, because sometimes they deserve it. Each character in this book was a gem of character development, and you get about a dozen of them in the course of the book. I thought this was really a quiet masterpiece. Number 2 is Verdigris by Michele Mari, Verderame, a gothic mystery set in rural Lombardy, a story about literature and language and everything in between, with an unreliable and impressionable narrator and a lovable monster. This is at once a fantastic gothic novel that is very much a love letter to the entire genre, and an exploration of how books, language, the things we read, the things we internalize, come to shape our perception of reality in countless ways. If you can read it in Italian, by all means do, because its linguistic genius will shine through most evidently in the original, but even if you are going to read it in translation, it's still worth it, especially if you're somebody who has wasted enough of their life reading mysteries, gothic novels, all these things that come to turn your brain into a bit of a mush, come to change your fill your mind with references, cliches, generic expectations. You're going to find great solace in here, and it will resonate with you quite loudly. Number one, my favorite book from 2024 was, alas, another untranslated Italian novel, Sabat Shampan by Alice Valeria Oliveri. So the other Italian books on this list that are not yet translated are all books that if ever they get a translation, I think you should totally check them out. They're all great novels. This one is possibly the exception, because I suspect that in order to fully appreciate it, you'll probably need to have grown up in Italy, especially at a specific historical moment between the 90s and the 2000s. Sabat Shampan is a testimony of a life spent within books, sure, with friends, why not, but also spent for significant stretches of time alone in front of a television. It's a book about the strange companionship and almost sinister sense of friendship that television and other entertainment media can offer to certain types of introverted people. Very much like Claudia Durastanti's Strangers I Have Known, it is a biography of the protagonist that doesn't necessarily tell you too much about what happened in her life, but instead mediates the story of her life through something different. In this case, through the TV programs that were very important for her as a child, as a teenager, and then as a young adult in her 20s. Sabat Shampan is very much a novel, but in some ways it's almost an essay about some of the trashiest programs ever aired on Italian television, especially on Berlusconi's Mediaset TV stations. It is really a book about how Berlusconi's media have shaped a whole generation of Italians, including myself, really altering and influencing their cultural DNA. It's one of the first books I've ever read that explored the specific world in which I grew up. It took certain things that I always knew intimately, or at least I suspected them, and it presented them to me in the form of a beautiful story and in the form of beautiful language. It was really an amazing experience, and I adored it. If you read Italian, I actually wrote a fairly gushing review of it in La Balena Bianca, which is an amazing Italian literary magazine. I'll post a link to it in the description box. That's my 20. Thank you so much for watching the video. My throat's a bit sore now. Please let me know what's your favorite books that you read in 2024. Let me know in the comments. If you've read any of these or you're going to read them, do let me know, and I do check out your lists. In fact, some of the awesome books I read in 2024 were some that were recommended to me in the comments to past videos like this one, past top 20s of the books I read in the past. Thank you as always for watching. Thank you to my patrons for supporting the YouTube channel. That's always immensely appreciated. And bye everybody. Happy 2025.